Okay.
Okay. Welcome, everybody. I'm Michelle Gaza, and
I'm Melissa Sandfort.
we're here to tell you about our upcoming course, Inner Diversity Work or Intercultural Diversity Work, exploring the cultures of different parts, internal parts from the IFS perspective. So we're just going to give a little overview first about kind of what brought us to this topic. And then we'll finish up with more of a detailed description of what the course involves and who it's really for. And if you do have any questions that we don't answer, we welcome you to reach out to us, and we'll leave the emails in the description below. So yes, I was really inspired to work with Melissa, who is actually the person who introduced me to IFS. And
many years ago.
And I actually I finally put myself on the IFS website, and I had to go back and see when my trainings were. I realized between the time I met you and was introduced to IFS and the time I finished level 3, it was only 2 years. So
insane.
Basically, Melissa lit a fire under my butt that just has not stopped. And so I'm very, very grateful to Melissa, and I just deeply appreciate the way that she's so fluid with the model and how refined her skill set is. So I'm really excited to do this course because I feel like every time I talk with Melissa, like things get teased out that are just very rich and exciting and satisfying. So I'm just going to start by kind of talking in general about external diversity and why that matters and what that brings in terms of challenges and gifts. So growing up, my dad had international business and my mother was an immigrant from Australia. So for literally my whole life, I was constantly being exposed to people who spoke different languages, people from different nations, different religions. And then I went through the public school system in Chicago, which was really the same thing. So I learned from a very young age that you can have many different people looking at the exact same thing and having a totally different experience. And I really learned about respecting those different views and seeing them as having their own validity in and of themselves. And I also, in that context, had a lot of like face plants and tripping over myself from like faux pas from not understanding certain cultural things. And now I'm even thinking of an experience my mother had. She was in Hong Kong, I believe, at some fancy dinner party. And at the end, they were passing around rice balls. And so she grabbed one and was eating the rice balls, not knowing that the cultural significance of that is you pass around a rice ball at the end of dinner. And the symbol is if guests take it, it's like an insult saying you didn't feed them enough.
Oh, no.
Right? And then I'm thinking of another example. When I was in India, I was speaking to a friend of mine who's actually, he's European, but he was born and raised there. And he was telling me about all the prostitution in Mysore. And I'm like, well, I never saw any prostitutes, but where are they? What are you talking about? He's like, oh, well, you wouldn't know. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? He said, well, the only way that you know a woman is a prostitute is she'll look you in your eyes and hold eye contact. So my jaw dropped and I'm like, that's what I do to every shop owner I meet in India. Every rickshaw driver, every hotel concierge, I'm looking them in their eyes. And he's like, yeah, culturally, that's really inappropriate here. Like, you don't even go anywhere publicly as a woman with a man who's not your father, son, brother, grandfather, uncle, whatever. So this can be a territory with lots of richness and also like unexpected challenges and static that we don't even necessarily intend. But what I learned over time is just to sort of have like openness, patience, forgiveness, and really a lot of curiosity. And I think the curiosity is kind of what saved me in these arenas. So when Melissa and I started talking about doing this interdiversity work, I was really excited because one of the things I love when I found out about IFS is the way that it really respects the different parts, the different types of parts. What are their needs? What are their challenges? What are their perspectives? What are their experiences? And not just pushing past that to reach an agenda, but really learning how to slow down and make space and just validating those different perspectives and how rich that is in the healing process. So I want to hand it over to you, Melissa, to just talk a little bit about inner diversity and why it matters, why it's important, and when we really take the time to study this and work with respect with these different parts, how that makes a difference.
Well, I think for me, what's really exciting is that the no agenda, right?
Mhm.
Like whenever, so often people like everybody, it's so common to be blended, slightly blended with a manager and to
Mhm.
think, this is who I really am, like in the, hypothetical situation where, oh, there's a part of you that wants to eat ice cream and a part of you that doesn't, and you're not either one. They're both parts. Like one's a manager, one's a firefighter. People be like, yeah, but I mean, really, it's the one that doesn't want to eat the ice cream that's my real self. Like
Mhm.
that's like the belief is people so often skew to the manager. And then I think what happens internally is this sense of like not being able to accord the real full space for parts to just be as they are right now without a sense like there's something wrong with you,
Mhm.
you know? So like, for instance, I mean, managers as a culture, that is their orientation, right? Like, so right now it's like, I'm talking about managers and it's like, I'm almost bordering on disparaging them the way firefighters would, right? I'm
Mhm.
getting dangerously close,
Mhm.
My
Mhm.
firefighters are like, yeah, let's go there.
Mhm.
No, let's not go there because like managers as a culture, right? They're always trying to fix things. They're always trying to make it better. And there's something really beautiful about that in like that idealized, like, oh, let's make the world better. Let's make you better, right? It's just it can get kind of like knee jerk and get really like habitual. And so when managers are always responding to all other parts, firefighters, exiles, like, oh, let me get in there, let me help you, you know, then the other parts just are like so frustrated with that all the time. But if like, for instance, in the past, when my managers would do that to my exiles, they would be like mad and really frustrated. And then like we'd come to a standstill,
Mhm.
like the exiles would try to be talking about something. I'd be with them. The managers would come in because that's what they do. And then the exile would be like, so mad. And over time, I think by thinking about it as a cultural, not a personal issue, like it's not that the managers are coming in to try to like stomp you and like crush you and like label you. It's not personal. That's actually just culturally where they're coming from. That's their knee-jerk thing that they do. Then the exiles could be like, okay, what would it be like if that's how you are, and I know that you're really excited to like come in and help me, and I don't need that help right now, but there's like, I think when parts start to lean into understanding each other as cultures, then it brings more patience and more space to the process. And actually, I think that each part can lean into their own self energy around relating to each other.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the potentials I saw right away, because I know, as I've spoken to you before, when I learned the basics of the model, I saw this is really describing what I've been seeing my whole life. There's the polarity of masculine and feminine. There's the polarity of so-called white people, so-called Black people. There's the polarity of so-called Eastern culture and Western culture, right? And we've talked before about like living in the Southern hemisphere, Northern hemisphere, how's that, all these things. And so what I loved about IFS is that finally this was a model that was seeing, as I had seen from my experiences and like hard-earned wisdom, you got to let go of the judgments. You got to get curious, or we're toast, man. Humanity's not going to make it. So I deeply appreciate that. And maybe I'll just say, just for 1 minute, just a real quick overview, just in case someone's found themselves here and they're like, managers, firefighters, exiles, what the heck are you talking about? So in IFS, this is a system that has really just systematically described different types of inner parts, aka inner children, aka soul fragments, persona, etc. So your inner children, they could be 5 years old or 55 years old, right? These are just parts of us that are holding either unresolved trauma, or they're doing a specific job in our system. So the managers and firefighters are protectors. The difference is managers are proactive protectors. So they tend to be like the never again. We want to prevent ourselves from ever getting triggered. So we want to be forward thinking and prevent. Whereas the firefighters are reactionary. So just like a real firefighter out there in the world, if your house is on fire, they're not going to proactively like go in and gently remove your grandmother's vase and make sure like the silk curtains are out of the way. They're just putting out the fire no matter what gets broken. The goal is to put the fire out. So similarly, our inner firefighters are these protectors that flare up when an exile gets triggered. An exile being a type of part that holds the trauma, the uncomfortable or scary or anxiety, the shame. Yeah, all these sort of things that we don't know how to deal with. So we exile it. Yeah. So that's as the briefest explanation I think I've ever given of the parts, but that at least gives people sort of a general idea of what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, yeah. And I think that, well, I don't want to get too much into the details because that's what we're going to be doing in the course. But I've just noticed over the years, working with this model, how much my own parts and the parts of my clients just really deeply appreciate being seen, being recognized, and being appreciated, and recognizing what their intention is, even if the results aren't necessarily all the way positive. And I think that's something really important as well, recognizing that these parts take on these roles typically, or pretty much all the time, inside of no-win situations. You've got a rock and you've got a hard place and there's no way out, right? So what are you going to do? Yeah. So I feel like when we appreciate like the external constraints and limitations that these parts face and how that affects and shapes their cultures, it's really fruitful, and it just it helps you to be allies with these different aspects of yourself or your clients, as opposed to working against them, judging them, trying to change them, you know?
Yeah, I mean, because like, for instance, another way to describe the system that you just described, right? Mm-hmm. Managers, firefighters, exiles. Sometimes I like to think of it as an equilateral triangle. And so like the managers and the firefighters are at the top, and then the exiles are at the bottom. And the managers and firefighters are going to be as extreme, like as polarized with each other as the exiles are down below. So however intense the negative like thoughts or feelings or burdens that you're carrying, that's going to be as far out as your managers and firefighters get to protect you from those feelings. So in a way, we have kind of X-ray vision on people, mm-hmm. you know, because however extreme their firefighters or managers are, that's, you know, that's actually how extreme their exiles are. So somebody who's shooting heroin, okay, well, the depth of the pain that they're reacting to, it's very deep down there. Mm-hmm. Another way I like to think of it is like an orchestra. If your personality were an orchestra, right, where you have like the first chair, the second chair, the third chair, the fourth chair, you can think of having like first chair all the way to like 10th chair parts, right? And so when they're like 10th chair, it's like, let's just say this is not an orchestra that people would pay money to go listen to.
Right.
Listening to that orchestra, but not really ready for public consumption. But, you know, so at the 10th chair, everything is so out of tune that you can barely hear the culture,
Mm.
right? Because it's not even a functional culture. And so really our goal here in this workshop is to describe more functional parts, like maybe first chair to third or fourth chair at the most, right? Because that's where you can really see the cultures.
Yes. And so along those same lines, we do want to let people know that if you're really still dealing with those 10th chair parts, this process, it may be a little bit too fast or overwhelming or triggering even. So this program is really for people who either already know the IFS model or have been doing similar work with other models, because we do both know that there are other models that do parts work and that sort of thing.
Voice
So
dialogue, for instance.
exactly, which is a prominent, excellent example. So if you've never done any of the work before, you've never been introduced to self-leadership, it may go a little bit too fast. But if you're kind of on the border and you're not really sure, then we really welcome you to reach out to us. Just send us an email. And, you know, if something in you is feeling like, oh, I just really want to do this, then we can work something out. But yeah, so I want to get back to this. So this idea that when we see these extreme behaviors, it does give us kind of, it's like a cheat code where we can see, oh, there's really some disturbance in the force inside of there. And that kind of compassionate lens and the curiosity and the spaciousness that brings is really helpful. And that's another thing that we're really going to be bringing to this workshop is, how can you, let's say, love a part of you that does something extreme that results in challenges in your life, right? Or things that you regret. How can you stay curious and not just want to dismiss, condemn, or get rid of that part? Because that's the other thing. We do sometimes have parts that do want to get rid of other parts. I don't want to hear from this part ever again. I'm not interested. I don't care what you have to say. And one thing that's so important that the IFS model always brings us back to is that each one of us is a closed system. So there is no getting rid of parts. The only time we ever talk about getting rid of anything is if there's like a critter, meaning an entity attachment that doesn't belong in your system anymore, that's not serving. That's a different protocol for a different workshop. So this is all about our parts who really are a part of us, even the ones who have behavior that can be a little bit troubling, maybe frustrating, maybe really frustrating, but coming to understand that even those parts have a reason. And they get labeled neurotic, but if you understand their internal logic, it's not neurosis. They have a reason for it. We label it neurotic because it's not functional now, but it came again out of that rock and a hard place situation where they had like a very small range of choices of how to adapt to a crap situation. And this is how they decided to adapt.
Yeah, like I think about when I used to have a really serious sugar addiction. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, and I was in a car driving to Sweet Mandy B's in Chicago, which is like a place where it's like literally sugar is practically dripping from the ceiling. Car, and I'm driving there. It takes like 20 minutes to get there. And my managers would be in the, like basically the passenger seat, and they would be saying, we're driving to diabetes.
Yeah.
We're literally driving to the hospital.
Yeah.
We're going to get diabetes.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I really hear you, right? It's really uncomfortable that the firefighters, like in order to handle the intensity of the pain of my exiles, this is what they have to do to keep my system in homeostasis, right?
Mhm.
Like, I'm not saying to my managers, hey guys, would you like this or heroin? I'm not saying that to them, although maybe there are like some firefighters that are thinking that, right? But like the reality is that our protectors are going to use the least harmful method that they can. So paradoxically, actually going to Sweet Mandy B's was the least harmful thing because I wasn't drinking alcohol. I wasn't shooting heroin, But I mean, here are my managers. They're having a nervous breakdown about it, right? My firefighters aren't saying anything because that's typical of firefighter culture. They're not the biggest talkers, they're more doers, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so here I am in the car, and it's like, just like self-leadership doesn't, like, I think there's this, again, managerial idea of self-leadership, that self-leadership means I'm perfect, right? That's not it. What it is that in the moment of who I am right today, as the human that I am, with the burdens and the flaws and the deficits, and however else you want to describe me, you could say, oh, the mental illnesses that, you know, I have adapted, blessings to me, right? However you want to call it, right? In my humanity right today, it may be that for me to balance the depth of the pain that I am carrying, I need to have cupcakes for lunch. Like, that's what I'm doing. And what would it be like if instead of doing that and hating myself and getting like, and you know, and I'm not perfect, and why can't I be self-led and all this like craziness? What if, okay, I am just where I am right now today, and that's really okay. And like self-leadership is saying to the managers, wow, you know, I get it. It's really hard. We might get diabetes from this. That's absolutely true. That's where we're at, you know? And I can't stop it, but I can be present with you. And I can actually validate that this violates your values of health and long-term thinking. You know, those are some manager cultural values that I get they're really being stepped on right here. And I get that's hard. But that's just where we are. And so all we can do is the best we can do with who we are today.
Yeah, and you had said something in one of our last conversations about, you know, so, and I'm going to paraphrase and use different words, but if you grow up in a family with mental illness, in order to survive, you have to develop a mental illness to cope. If you grow up in a family with addiction, you're going to have some kind of addictive cycle to cope with that. Because as little children, you can actually have self-leadership as a child, but in some of those situations, it's dangerous. It's going to be seen as being disrespectful if you speak from that place. If you criticize the addictions or mental illness of the elders around you, that's not going to go over so well. It could make it escalate, right? And so seeing it inside that context, that the distortions in our inner world are a result of the distortions we were born into in this wonderful Kali Yuga era, where
you can say distortions are adaptions.
Yes, it's an adaptation. So then, like you're saying, when that firefighter flare comes up and you've got 6 cupcakes in front of you, you know, it's like, okay, so here's where I'm at. It also doesn't mean this is where I'm always going to be at. And also when I see it in the context of why I'm here, I can have a lot more compassion. I don't have to like self-flagellate and beat myself up for it. And I do appreciate what you're saying, because this can also bring us to the discussion of self-like parts. There is this delusion that being in self-leadership means we're the perfect weight. Our skin is perfect and glowing. We walk on water. We never feel angry. We never feel vengeance. We never get depressed. Our, you know, like every calorie is the perfect nutritional content, right? We never touch alcohol. We never make a mistake in getting in a relationship that goes sour. It's just simply not the case. It's more about having compassion and that curiosity, that allowing us the experience, because without these experiences and moving through it, it's just not going to shift. So one of these special categories of managers that does wreak a lot of havoc in lots of communities is this self-like part. A manager, so again, a proactive protector who kind of mimics, it's like a pantomime of the self, right? It's an acting out of the self from the lens of what that manager thinks the self is, which really is some of these things we're talking about now. Well, if I was self-led, I would be friends with everyone. I would have all the spiritual answers.
This ideal. It's not what is arising, like just authentically flowing, naturally just emerging, just like being. It's this curated, carefully crafted, like, you know, perfection idea that's going to be presented, this persona, this perfect persona.
Yeah, it's a performance that's not authentic. And
Yeah.
eventually you do see the cracks, because no matter how strong of a self-like part it is, at some point that system is still going to get triggered and the mask is going to fall, right? um, but I do see a lot of you know, the spiritual gurus in the religious world, even, you know, in all types of arenas, there's leaders blended with a self-like part that unfortunately then damages their students, followers, their flock, whatever, because they've bought into this false idea of the higher self, and they're judging themselves if they fall short of that. And then of course they're going to do that to the people they interact with who think they've
Well,
got the answers.
yeah, and I mean, like for me, I mean, we're never gonna do IFS from the perfect place. You know what I mean? Like we're, you know, it's a moving target. You know, we're trying to be in as much self energy as we can be in. So let's
Mhm.
not be perfectionistic about, you know, where we're doing IFS from. But what you're saying is this self-like manager, if my teacher thinks that the self is actually a self-like manager, they're going to teach me to do IFS from that place.
Hmm.
And so I'm just going to be like slightly off. And I mean, we're all going to be slightly off. So it's not like the end of the world. But the more that we believe that that's the place that we're supposed to be cultivating, the bigger the like offness gets. You know what I mean? It's like if you start out in New York and you're 1 centimeter off, if you go all the way to California, then you're like 300 miles off.
And it's way off. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the exile system is suffering even more. So I would say there's some of that. And then, you know, even other energies that we could call other things in, like, say, for example, the political arena, which is a really great arena where there's people sort of pantomiming righteousness, right? And you've got some people in blue pantomiming righteousness and some people in red pantomiming righteousness. And you know, that analogy that Richard Schwartz has used, it's a Chinese proverb, right? When the buffalo fight, it's the frogs that get trampled. So you have the conservatives and the liberals fighting and fighting and fighting, both of them sincerely thinking they're doing the right thing or the best thing under the circumstances. But notice, the problems are not getting solved. The children are still suffering. Our school systems are barbaric torture chambers. It's really horrible. So humanity is like perpetuating this illusion of, all this efforting and fighting against is the way to go. And it actually takes us further and further away from the actual reckoning with the real problem that's underneath it. And this kind
Yeah.
of, yeah.
And I want to pick up on that, the efforting, right? Like, you know, you're more blended with the part when there's more efforting.
Yes.
And one of the things that we want to really like delve into both theoretically and experientially in the workshop is how we can, you know, experience our self energy as a place of less efforting in relationship to each of the different three parts: managers, firefighters, exiles, from a place of less effort, in part because we I mean, it's not that the self energy needs to learn about the different cultures of the parts. Actually, the parts need to learn about each other's cultures, right?
Yes. Mhm.
So like when firefighters and exiles hear, oh, you know, these are some of just the struggles of managers as a culture, it can help them be less aggravated when managers do their thing. You know, I mean, same thing, like managers have this idea that a lot of times like all the other parts should be like them.
Mhm.
Like, you know what I mean? Like that's like a vision, like, well, if everybody were just evolved, then they would be a manager. It's like, no, no, that is like, no. I mean, we need our firefighters. You know, yes, when they're really extreme, I get why managers get very frustrated. We're going to get diabetes, whatever, you know, yeah, okay, 6 cupcakes, that's tough. But we do need to relax. Like
Mhm.
after, you know, a lot of inner work or something, like maybe the firefighters like, now we're watching 3 episodes of Netflix. And you know what? That's actually healthy. That's good for our parasympathetic nervous system,
Yeah.
you know? Like we can't live this life where we wake up, work all day, work some more and go to bed, which may be like the manager ideal, but it's actually not good for our, like, we're going to have a heart attack.
Yes. And the thing is that I feel like extreme parts don't get in the beginning is that making an accommodation, even if it's just taking the time to get curious or just getting 1% of compassion about what it would be like to be one of these other parts, it actually makes it easier for everybody.
Yeah.
And I feel like what I love about the IFS framework is that this stuff can be introduced in a no shame, no blame kind of scene where we're not trying to prove that somebody's the bad guy. Instead, we're trying to understand motivations, understand origin stories. But this is a perfect parallel of also like white culture versus Black culture. And this whole white supremacy thing is this sort of like patronizing benevolence, like, oh, if we could just let everybody have what we have as white culture, then the world will be saved. And it's a huge, humongous blind spot about, no, that's going to create a deep imbalance, right? But by understanding and learning that, that's good for white people as well as for everybody else, just as it's also actually even just strategically helpful in a political sense to understand the challenges of managers or white people and why they do what they do, so that you can understand how to interact with them in a way that brings us closer to integration in the center rather than further apart, where then everybody's got to pull harder, right? Because anytime we lean one way, somebody else has to lean the other way to keep that balance. So that's something that I just feel like this is a time where, you know, we can look at externally and feel like the world is falling apart. I have to do something. The best thing you could do right now to save the world is to go inside and see these things happening internally, see your own internal polarizations, your own unconscious judgment or dismissal or lack of curiosity, right? Labeling people without really giving an opportunity to see, well, what's maybe behind that surface behavior that's presenting. Because as we do that internally, our external world will start to reflect that. And in fact, the external world, by metaphysical law, cannot reflect that until we do it internally first.
Yep.
Just how it works.
Can we pause for a sec?
Sure. Okay, we had someone arrive at Melissa's door, so excuse the interruption. So one thing we did just want to mention, and then we'll speak about the course description and the details of how it's structured. Melissa was mentioning how sometimes there can be a little bit confusion about how to sort of understand the different parts and figure out who's who and what's what. At most of the time when we're introduced to the IFS model, we're looking more at extreme or burdened parts, which I don't even like to call them unhealthy for the same reason I don't like to call them neurotic. It's an adaptation.
Yeah. They're burdened. Yeah.
Yeah. They've got a behavior that's an adaptation, and the invitation is to help bring them into present time to release the burden and release the stuff that caused that behavior adaptation in the first place. So we learn about sort of the extreme burden versions, but then there's the whole other range leading towards this, what we call a self-led part, which is a part who's been seen, respected, recognized. They've had a chance to tell their story without being shamed or corrected. They've been welcomed in, to this unconditional love that's at the center, where the self is, the center. And as that process happens and these parts become unburdened, there's less necessity to be extreme, right? And they learn, oh, wow, we're in present time now. It's not like it was back 20 years ago when I started this job of eating cupcakes to soothe myself. We actually have a lot more agency now. A lot of our exiles have been unburdened. And there's a harmony that happens when the parts become self-led. So you can have a manager and a firefighter doing a behavior together harmoniously in agreement. These two could have been diametrically opposed 10 years ago, because I had the sugar addiction too. I had managers who were like, do not eat another piece of chocolate cake. And my firefighters are like, but if we eat all the cake now, there won't be any stress around having the cake in the house. So let's just eat it now. Then this whole tension will be done. And they really believed that, and it took me 10 years to get to the point where I can have a chocolate cake in front of me and just eat one slice or even not have any, which I never, ever thought would be possible.
And I wanted to say that I think eating issues, like the number one way your IFS work is going well is over time if your eating issues are getting better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And really any addiction issues, but eating it's such a good one to look at because everybody's got to eat. So it's something that we're working with all the time.
Yeah.
But the firefighters who used to want to do the chocolate cake eating, they're still here inside of me. They didn't go anywhere. The difference is now the exiles that numbing of the chocolate cake we're trying to drown out and silence, they've come to the surface. They've been respected. They know they've got time to do the stuff that brings them joy. The other part, like my managers aren't freaked out by the exiles in the way they used to be, all this sort of stuff. And we'll get into way more detail about that in the course. But we just wanted to kind of explain that can be a little bit of a point of confusion that you may hear the description of firefighters, but since you're not shooting up heroin, you might be like, well, maybe I don't have firefighters, right?
We all have firefighters.
We all have firefighters. You may have healthy firefighters who are just like, knock, knock. We worked 6 days this week. I think we should take Sunday off and just go to the park or go to a friend's house. That healthy aspect of firefighters is like, let's live, let's enjoy, let's let loose a little bit. Let's not be so rigid. Let's be a little more spontaneous. And the happier, more at peace, secure managers are like, I will support you in doing that. So on Friday, I'm going to make sure our laundry is done so that we can wear that outfit that makes us feel so good to the party on Saturday.
Yeah.
Whereas in the past, I literally would have to set up timers on my days off, and my managers would only get a certain amount of time because they can find things to keep me busy for the rest of eternity. There's always another dish to be washed, another corner of the house that needs to be swept or cleaned, another email to be returned. So I had to literally put a boundary on them. Like, you have 1 hour today. And then it's the exiles.
With the computer, with my managers are like, they themselves are like, we're going on Amazon, we're buying a timer, and we're going to give ourselves a timeout, because that's what happens, right? Managers are so focused and so good at getting things done, but if there isn't like enough self-energy to come in to just help them be a little looser with it, they will literally take up your entire day, your entire week, your entire month, your entire life with just tasks.
And I'm glad you stated it that way, because I think managers, again, who also Self-Lake Parks typically are managers, they cultivate this presence like, I've got it all together. I don't need help. You need help. You need to change. I've got it all together. So literally that timer can be helpful because they can't stop themselves.
Right. And that's part of what we're talking about in the course is like, what are the cultural like ways of being of each part, so that parts can have more insight into themselves and more compassion for themselves. And so other parts can have more compassion for them. Like, just knowing this about managers, that like, they're not bad, that they can't stop themselves, right?
Because neither can the firefighters or exiles.
Yeah, it's just everybody has like their cultural kind of way. And there's like elements of it that's adaptation. There's elements of it that's inborn, and like everybody's going to kind of like, as they do their own work with their own parts, they're going to learn, like what's a thing about firefighters that's just really natural to their culture, that's healthy. It's not going to change and it's fine. Like, firefighters are always going to be like, hey, how can we relax? Like, that's never going to change, I mean, like, the more addictive side of it over time, that can change, but the orientation towards relaxation isn't going to change.
Yes, beautifully stated. And with managers, the orientation towards having organization and planning ahead, knowing that like, yeah, we're in summertime now, but winter will come. And that's something that we've got to keep in mind. But we can do it. Yeah, it's just
okay.
it's managers are very concerned with like that material plane survival organization, not getting caught, ass out, you know, unprepared, right?
Yeah.
Firefighters, like you said, this very important motivation of relaxing and when they're healthy, like healthy social connection. And then the exiles, joy, fun,
Just being
hopefulness,
good, being, right?
magic. Yes.
The
That
new,
innocent childhood. Well, if you have a healthy childhood where that's allowed, you know, the pure innocence that's just like excited about things and like open to experiences, that sort of unadulterated, you know, kind of magical sense, right?
yeah,
And it's
sometimes,
very loving.
sometimes I like to think of it as like the essence of the way of being of managers is future oriented.
Yes.
They're planning and organizing and strategizing to make sure everything's good, and there's a future orientation to that.
Yes.
And then firefighters, their way of being is present oriented. Like, how can we relax right now, today? They want it like it's very much in the moment. And then exiles, there is a sense of like past about them, you know,
Mm.
like just like the I don't know, I mean, they have a present orientation, but to the extent that they're very childlike, there's that past element of like your childhood or
Mm.
childish like elements of you.
Yes, that's such an excellent nuance. See, this is why I want to teach the course with you. These sort of nuances are important. So let's go into talking about structure. So we're going to meet for 4 webinars, once a month for 4 months, beginning March 5th, Saturday. And each webinar is going to be about 2 hours, maybe 2.5 maximum.
Yeah.
And then we're going to draw the line. So the beginning of each webinar will be similar to what we've been doing now, just discussing the culture of the part, you know, the parts that we're
The
focusing
first part
on.
of the webinar will be just a check-in.
Yes, thank you.
Check in and, center and kind of get connected, right? And then after that, we'll have a space where after we check in, maybe we'll do some journaling or something, have a little bit of time to just kind of like jot down some of the whatever came up in that check-in, right? Going inside, connecting with yourself. And then after that, we'll talk about more depth about the culture of that part. And then, people can also have questions and we'll answer questions about it. So we'll go into much more detail about each individual part. So the first week will be managers, second week firefighters, third week exiles, and then the fourth week will be kind of an integration of everything. And also, I was thinking that fourth week, we can talk even more about the interactions between the parts as well, like common patterns of cultural misunderstanding.
Yes, and I think that will be excellent and very juicy. So this kind of brings us, I think, naturally to the safety question.
Although, wait, after because we're still talking about the
structure. Oh, right, yeah.
So after we talk about the specific part, right, we'll kind of have like a teaching, discussion with questions and stuff like that. That'll be kind of more of the theory. We'll take a break. And then we're going to have the experiential piece. Because I mean, without experiential, IFS is a lived practice.
Yes.
I could say that 50 times.
Yes. So we have to be very cautious of the parts who will very sneakily try to keep it in the theory drawer. So we can't actually apply it. So we'll even help those parts, right? So those parts are also welcome because both of us understand that some of the stuff that's in there gets scary and uncomfortable, painful, sad, all the things, right? So we can appreciate and respect the parts that are like, whoa, that's a nice idea, but I'm gonna keep it in the idea box, right? So having a space where we can really just invite all of that to come forward with the curiosity and the compassion and allowing even parts like that, the floor or the talking stick to explain, well, why do you feel that way? Like, what are you afraid would happen if you actually take this from the theory box and actually look inside at what's going on, right? And then when they express their fears about it, validating that so
Yeah.
that, you know, we can work in an arena where everybody's feeling heard and respected. And if, like, gymnastics as a metaphor, if I'm new to backflips, right? You're not going to tell me just go do it on the concrete.
I'm not doing that.
Yeah, we're going to have thick, like 8-inch, you know, mats, and then a net and a spotter and all this stuff, right? So it's okay if I say, I'm nervous about backflips. I feel afraid, so
Yeah.
that I can get my needs met, so I don't break my neck in the process of the backflip development, right? There's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, and so I like the structure that we're evolving here for the workshop, where we're going to start with theory, because managers need to feel situated in what are we doing, and getting information helps kind of create a scaffold for them to know, like, what is the area we're dealing with here, right? So we're
Mhm.
going to have that theory, we're going to have time for questions, you know, and of course the whole workshop's not going to be the theory though, so we're going to, like, you know, have a certain time for that to help the managers feel comfortable, and then they know we're going to switch and we're going to do experiential. But like you said, it's experiential with mats, you know, and
Yeah.
you, each person gets to determine how much they want to share, or if they want to share it all. And you know, everything is voluntary, so whatever, you know, you're going to lead people through a kind of guided meditation, but people can put their earplugs in, or they can turn it off, or they can just journal, like, you know, you can use that time for, you know, whatever really feels right, you know.
Yes. And so in the other group courses I've done in the past where we do the experiential IFS, I always let people know, if you need to go slower, come back. There's a recording of the video, so everything's recorded. You know, if you need help, raise your hand, unmute, put something in the chat, right? So we're not going to introduce you to this and then just kind of throw you out there and be like, good luck, right? Which is also why we're keeping the group small. So this isn't 1,000 people who we're introducing to the theory and then churning up the system and then being like, hope it works out for you, right? There's a lot of opportunity. And if something happens during the process and you get triggered and you need the one-on-one attention, we will find a way to get you in. I definitely can. I have secret parts of my schedule that is not available to the public for these sort of, you know, urgent scenarios. And, you know, you can email, that sort of thing. And then just to clarify, as Melissa was saying, week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4, it's once a month for 4 months. So the first week being March, the second week happens in April, and so forth, the meetings.
May, June, yeah.
Yeah. So shall we segue just to sort of safety in general? Do you want
Yeah, I
to
like
talk about that
yeah,
more? Okay.
yeah. So I mean, I am we're both very obsessed about safety. I mean, and I love what you said, how it's like we're not trying to, like, just lecture to 1,000 people and be like, oh, let me get you, like, IFS is a very simple idea, but it's not easy. Riding a bike is a simple idea, but you know, the first time I tried it, like, my entire face became a scab.
Oh no. Uh-huh.
Use my face as the brake,
Oh.
basically.
Oh
So,
no.
I mean, you know, like, IFS can really, a little bit goes a long way,
Yes.
strong spice. And so, you know, it is normal, it is natural, it is expected, it is predictable that parts are going to get triggered. And even though, you know, we are trying to organize it in as safe a way as we can, right? We're limiting the class to 12 people. You know, we're starting with a check-in, you know, there's 2 of us, we're trying to really hold a safe space. And we're even doing it like managers first, then firefighters, then exiles, right? Because that's the safe order. Starting with managers is always kind of the safest place to start. You don't jump in with exiles. But even so, I mean, it's expectable that people are going to get triggered. And so we really want to make sure that we have, like, really good safety in the group. I personally, I mean, my parts, I am not going to participate in a group where there's crosstalk, you know, where if one person says something, then another person says, oh, yeah, you know, you should have blah, blah, blah. Woo! We're not having that, you know, like, we're going to have really, really assertive, ground rules for safety in the group, right? Like no cross talking, no giving other people advice, no telling people what they should do, right? Like when you hear other people speaking vulnerably about their experience, it does often trigger managers. And then
Yes.
those are some of their speech patterns. You should, or, oh, have you tried this? Or, oh, I want to, like, if someone says, well, I struggled with this, then, managers are like, oh, I want to help you. Okay,
Wow.
yes. And we're here if a manager does get triggered, right, to help that person come back to the I statement. So that if we hear any advice, any crosstalk, any you should, right, any you this, just gonna have a moment and just going to invite and either will help them to speak for their parts, right, to come back to the I statement, or if they're really over triggered, even to maybe go and spend some time with you or me, like for a minute to just get back to center. Because we really, in the same way that we're teaching that we want to respect each part and their culture, we want to really like respect each other in the group as well.
Absolutely. And the other thing that we've been doing in our group courses, it's just an electronic signing, but we have a statement that's basically saying, I agree to not share anything from inside of this course outside of the course, because, and Melissa and I spoke about this the other day, this is a world where, first of all, it was always a world where you don't know who knows who, but now everybody is kind of connecting into everybody with social media and all this stuff. I mean, I've definitely seen things on social media where I'm like, a person from one era of my life and even one geographical location turns out is friends with or even related to someone who I met in a totally different context, had no idea they knew each other. So I could have innocently been like, oh, let me tell you a story about this guy I know in Indiana who blah, blah, blah. Well, it turns out that's her cousin and she didn't know this, right?
Yeah.
So we want to be just very committed to being mindful about that. And if there is something that happens in the group that really inspires you and you really wanted to share, directly ask the person, how would you feel if I shared this story? Or could I share it in this very sort of safe way where your identity is totally, hidden? Now, some people don't care about that. I've met some clients who are at the point, that's why I have clients who even will do demos that I've shared publicly. And they're at the point where their system is at a certain level of security where that's okay for them. And then some people's system is very, very, very sensitive about that. And, then there's people that we don't really know their history. So we don't know why the sensitivity is there or why the fears may be there. So we just want to go in being very mindful about that. Because again, in this world of social media, we just want to be aware that you never know what's going to get shared and who may know who. So we really want to respect people's privacy.
Yeah. So that's confidentiality is a really big C word for safety. For sure.
It is. And the C words, of course, we're referring to is the descriptions of self, confidence, clarity, calmness, compassion, etc., which we will be going over many, 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 many times in this workshop. Okay, so we will put a link in the description for signing up. Oh, then that's one more thing. If you have worked with myself or Melissa already, then we are inviting you to register. But if you have never worked with either of us before, we do require you to go through an application process. It's just a few questions that you would answer on a recording and send to Melissa's email. And this is so we can get a sense of where you're at and what your support structure is. Because if we've never worked with your system before, we just want to be sure that if you get in here, and as we've just discussed, your system gets stirred up, that you have options for support. Because we can do a lot, but sometimes you need somebody who's like your neighbor or your cousin who you can go to physically when you're triggered. Sometimes people really need that. And due to the nature of this course, the vast majority of people joining are not going to be physically near to us. So we want to make sure.
Colorado or Chicago.
Exactly. So we want to be sure that you have that network there. Even if it's just one therapist or one really good friend who you can lean on. Okay. Oh, and then you can pay monthly or you can pay up front. Both of those options are there on the website, which again will be below. And I really encourage you, if you have any questions, email me. Currently, my calendar is booked until March for free consultations. But if you email me and say you're interested in the interdiversity workshop, I will find a way to see you in the next couple of weeks so that you have time to really talk to me and decide if this is right for you. Because I am really committed to people knowing what they're getting into and being comfortable and knowing it's the right match. Because it is, there is a little bit of commitment here in terms of energy and attention, and then the sort of work of integrating in between the webinars that will take some energy and time. Then also, I do want to also say, in terms of the safety stuff, everything we're doing is no coercion. So everything is voluntary. If you're at the workshop and you just don't feel like sharing that day, you don't have to speak. We're not doing that kind of coaching where you've got to be accountable and you've got to open up. That's not what this is about. And there might be places where that's the contract for different goals, and that's fine, but that's not what this is about. Everything is voluntary. There's no forcing, no pushing. And if you're one of those people who doesn't want to be on video, you don't have to be on video. You can just be on the audio. So I really want people to know that, because we both really respect and understand that people are in different places. Like there was a time where video was very triggering for me, and then I worked through it and now I don't care. But even now, there's some times where, like when I'm a student or participating in somebody else's workshop, I just don't feel like being on video. I don't want to get dressed that day. And it's a different energy, right? People have access to you on a deeper level when the video is on. And sometimes you just don't want that. So when we say we're serious about respect and safety, we're serious about respect and safety.
Yes.
Yes. Anything else you want to add on?
I can't think of anything. I'm really passionate about the specific parts in IFS. I know that there are some people who say, oh, it doesn't really matter, what type of part it is. Like sometimes there'll be a manager who's like, well, but what kind of part is this? And it's like this figuring it out part.
Mm-hmm.
And then it gets really like intense about, is it a manager? Is it a firefighter? Is it an exile? And when you're first like starting out, like it can be so hard just to get to know a part that you really don't have a sense of, is it a manager, a firefighter, or an exile? And so I think because of that figuring it out part, there has been this reaction, which is, oh, it doesn't really matter. You know what I mean? Just to get that part to kind of be calm.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's truth that when you're very first starting out, don't get hung up on what part is it, because the most important thing is just to unblend from the part and begin to get a relationship to it, right? But I do think that as you go forward in IFS, this has been my experience, I think you would agree, it is actually quite empowering and deepening to really understand and know the culture of the part, the type of part you're dealing with. Because as you really get to understand the specificity of managers, the specificity of firefighters, the specificity of exiles, right? They have different energies, they bring different things, and it can deepen your IFS practice, deepen your self-compassion, deepen your internal compassion from one part to another, to begin to really see each other as different cultures.
Absolutely. And IFS is definitely not about rushing and having an agenda. However, knowing what type of part it is, whilst also understanding these different cultures, it's a cheat code and a shortcut.
Yes, it is.
Because then instead of all this resistance to what the firefighter's doing, it's like I can skip past the resistance, because I'm like, oh, well, you're somebody who's like, let's get present, let's relax, let's think about how our nervous system is feeling here, guys. And I can understand that. And I can appreciate the good intention behind that. If some part is very rigid and very stiff and very frightful, I can have so much compassion. It's a manager who really doesn't want you to, get so overwhelmed that like you lose your job and now you're homeless, because they can go to catastrophizing really fast, right? But I can appreciate it, I can appreciate it. And then the exiles, just the way that they behave and the things that they're bringing and the desire that they're really just sort of, before you do the work, just sitting there like hoping, wishing, praying that maybe one day a tiny bit of light, a crack of light will shine down into this dungeon I'm in, and that's why I'm so loud in here and banging on the wall so much, because nobody's fed me any light for 30 years or sometimes 50, 60, 70, right?
Yeah.
You've got people well into adulthood who haven't done the work yet. So if the exile is being loud or like having lots of emotion, it's like, well, gosh, who can blame them?
Yeah.
Right. So it is a cheat code and a shortcut that doesn't take me out of being present. And I'm really committed in my one-on-one work with clients to make sure that I don't use these cheat codes and shortcuts to assume I know.
Yeah.
So it's a balance. On the one hand, there's these clues and indications. I'm like, okay, I see what part this is. And I know the culture of this type of part, so I can see the motivations, but I still ask the questions. So I'll phrase something like, yeah, what you just shared with me, I can imagine like how that would make me feel, but I'm going to ask this question so I can really understand how it made you feel. So what was it like to go through that?
Yeah.
Right. So that, because there are times I'm very intuitive, I'm very psychic. So most of the time what I'm sensing and feeling is correct, but sometimes it's not. And there's a whole thing there that I missed. So the beautiful thing about IFS is that this sort of labeling and categorizing isn't diminishing and it isn't silencing. I find it to be quite the opposite. It's, in my experience, it's giving more space, more recognition, more appreciation, and parts love to feel appreciated and recognized, because particularly when they're burdened, parts are doing things. If you really sit down and ask them, they don't want to do it. Like, it's amazing. You can meet an alcoholic who's in charge of drinking, hates alcohol.
Yep.
But it's like, if I don't drink this drink, that stuff in the basement is coming up and we're going to die because that pain is too big.
Yeah.
Right.
And they're not crazy. Yeah.
They're not crazy.
Yeah.
So that's the beauty and joy of IFS. And again, although this really is intended for people who already have experience in the model, if you've gotten this far in our little intro webinar here and this is really calling to you, please reach out, because we're not like IFS elitists, right? And one thing I love about IFS is that you can do IFS with anything, because wherever you go, your parts are there. So it's not like, oh, you can't do Reiki because you only do IFS, or you can't do voice dialogue, or you can't do family constellations. So you may be somebody who is deeply immersed in a similar model or a parallel model, and this is exciting to you, and you feel like it would enrich your personal practice. You're welcome to do that. I also feel this would be a great webinar for people who, like, maybe you've done your level 1 training and you want to get some deeper juice and nuance, and also some practice to work with your own inner system. Because again, if you want to be an IFS facilitator, there is no substitute for doing IFS on your inner world. Absolutely no substitute for that. So this is, something that would be really, really great if you're starting to do IFS with clients and you want to get more nuance, more refinement, and help your system have a more like really authentic, deep appreciation for your clients' parts as well as your own.
Well said, Michelle.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks, Melissa, for chatting with me. And I just really want to say I'm so excited for this. I just am anticipating like how good this is going to feel. And it's one of the things that's funny, because I've introduced this in the big IFS group on Facebook a couple of times. I'm like, I know it sounds crazy, but healing your trauma can actually be fun.
Hello, I'm there.
It's fun. And I don't want to say that, to trigger people who aren't having fun yet, because sometimes that's where we're at the beginning. It's not fun. Right? You're stressed, you're burdened, like you feel like your parts are never going to be unburdened. You're like, I don't have a self, like it's just not there. Or my manager is myself, or my firefighter is myself. So in the beginning, it can be tough, but the beauty of IFS is it's such an efficient way to help release the extreme polarizations, which is what is making it so tough, and just inviting everybody into the unconditional love at the center that just feels so good. And once that's established, like even our most like difficult, frustrating parts with despicable behavior, they have some beautiful golden gem of a gift inside. And what I love about IFS is that it's one of the most efficient ways to get to that gift. And then everybody's winning.
Yeah. Here's to us all winning.
Okay, so on that note, thank you for listening, and we warmly welcome you to reach out if you have questions. And if you are a client who's already worked with us, the link will be in the description box. You can go ahead and sign up right away. So see you soon. Bye.